I'm not trying to like jerk off. It's important to like explain the things, and it's kind of like it's helpful to have lobster here because then you can explain things without it being like self jerking off, because you can kind of jerk each other off, and it's like it's a lot less like, you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's a lot more fun if you have someone else doing it for you.
I was watching the balance talk video that went up today. I'm up to the part where you're talking about Challenger being overpied. I think something interesting to mention is that the devs may have tried to address it with vulnerable, but might have missed the marker there. Yeah. It seems somewhat likely. Are we ever keeping Culling Strike in this matchup? Seems kind of awful, right? This sort of seems like exactly what we want here. We want like the early beatdown. We're attacking odds, so Trifarian feels like it's good value. And Fury of the North is like, we have a somewhat made hand, right? The thing is like, we have our turn 1 play, we have our turn 3 play. I don't even mind banking mana on turn 2 if it comes to that. So I'm allowed to keep a card like Fury of the North, whereas like if we don't have Omen Hawk or a turn 3 play, if we're kicking deeper, then we have to kick even deeper and kick Fury of the North too. The important aspect of mulligans is that they have this sort of like weirdly sort of snowball aspect to them, if that makes sense. Because like if certain aspects of your hand are good, it allows you to keep other things that might normally be bad. But if I don't have a made hand, then I have to kick the Fury. This inclines you towards taking mulligans that are closer to full mulligan or 0 mulligan than you would otherwise think. So it's like, just think of mulligans in that way, where they're sort of cascading. It's like, well, I don't have early plays, so therefore, well, now I have to mulligan, you know, my Fury of the North, right? It is a sort of like oddly a snowball effect. This doesn't change much, but it can help you do complex math later. He hit both of his riders, so it reduces the odds of him drawing heroin. That is true. That is a point that I haven't really been thinking about. And it does make a bit of a difference. It does, actually. I should have been kind of like, I don't think it would have changed my play there, but it's definitely something I should be thinking about in general, because it will change plays in other sort of similar situations. So we have a few options here. We kind of want to be taking the Ashe here. In all likelihood, he'll swing, and he's got a swing here that he can take. I'm not really going to block that. I value my Ashe's health a little bit too much, and he might not play other units for our Ashe to be able to latch onto a target too. Now this sends us into a couple of different directions, right? We can keep the mana up for Fury of the North, or, you know, we can do a few things. We can, you know, okay, we're going to have 7 mana, right? So 7 mana means we can Fury Culling, or we can Fury Archer. Basically, those are kind of the 2 plays. Obviously, Kato Archer doesn't work because 2 spell mana. On attacks like this, it is really important to take like a value Fury, and I don't think the Archer pre is doing a ton here. It's a little easy for him to get value out of using Will on Ashe if I Archer pre, because then I'm sending Ashe down. Like I'm tapping below the ability to replay the Ashe. I would go to 3 unit mana. He can stop the Ashe's entire attack. Or a second palm. He can stop the Ashe's entire attack and therefore her ability, and he can also reset her +1/+1. And I think that's a little bit too much of a punish, so I think I will take the open attack here. It's not an amazing open. It's like saving the mana for culling doesn't really do anything, but I think it's good enough here. So this is going to be a Will or a palm on Ashe. If he had a bad hand and he was forced to do something like a double removal on Ashe, then Fury is a gigantic blowout. That kind of wins the game on the spot there. So that's fine. Not necessarily super ideal, but I mean, you have to get the wills out of their hands eventually. And here it's just like, you know, the choice of which big dude are we playing. Big dude that offers a bit less response is the bigger Kato. This is the one that we're likely guaranteed to be in for playing later. If he doesn't open attack, I can Archer. It doesn't do much, but mostly we're just using Archer to try to level up Ashe here. Okay, so this is a pretty unique position we're in here. So we have to be thinking to ourselves, okay, he's got 3 mana. Like, what is he going to do as a counter response to a lot of our potential options here, right? And the answer is really not too much. So a big question is, like, what's our play here? Well, this is a really complex play. So we can use Archer and double culling. And this is a rare opportunity to use our culling in a way that will guaranteed get value. We get it in under deny, which is pretty big because we have no other deniable targets until we have Ice Arrow, which means we have a chance of maybe completely bricking deny. Twin? Yeah, Twin can sometimes be good. But we do have the safe single culling on the Ice Field on one of the targets, which is where I'm going here. Because he can't twin past a single culling. I don't know how many twins this current version is running anyway. So the real answer is the way we have to make this play is going to be very dependent on how much mana we need to be banking next turn, right? That matters quite a bit. They usually don't run twin. I don't think they're supposed to run twin. I think twin is like a little bit trolly, honestly, for them to have. Like, Ezreal Karma doesn't run twin, right? Do they? Hang on. So when you're in a spot where you're like, does this deck run this? Literally just look at the net deck, you know? People don't do this enough. It's really simple, but like you just look at like what's commonly being run, and I mean you're never gonna know 100%, but it can definitely inform your odds, right? Non-committal Ezreal version. Yeah, we'll see. So we have the chance of getting culling under deny now, but look at what that would do for our mana, and this is like really important. Next turn we need to represent Fury. We're going to have 7 mana, so if we culling strike here, we won't have Fury plus X. We'll have 3 left over after Fury and culling, and that doesn't mean we can't play anything off of that. That's really bad. So we do need to hold off on the second culling, as somewhat painful as that might be, right? But now we have a lot of ways to play, because we've got 10 mana, which means we could do Ashe Iceveil Fury, or we could do Fury plus Kato, or Fury plus Sejuani. And this is like really important, keeping the options as diverse as we can. Now most of these decks aren't running Yone, so I'm not going to feel baited into the open attack on 7, but sometimes a Yone hits and it's like, teehee, you got Yone'd, sort of thing. Whatever. Honestly, is it just second Kato? Kato sort of like shoves the most beef, right? His Ezreal's not really a great blocker no matter what. I think I will just Kato here. So a really big thing is against control decks you really want to be developing in. You don't want to take open attacks here. Super common misconception that you want to like open attack against control decks. This is actually how control decks win. Most of the threats are at like fast speed, so they want you to open attack. The scary thing is like some people run Yone here. That's not really a big deal. Okay, so he's got the Will Concussive Palm. We don't have an answer to Palm. It's really nice. When you can stop the stun, you also stop the summon. So if you have a way to like sacrifice a unit or invalidate the target, that can be pretty powerful. Unfortunately, we've got nothing like that here. His Ezreal's 4 out of 8. We're not threatening very much. Okay, so we can just chill here. And he ends up with 1 Claws of the Dragon as well. Okay, so at this point again, we're getting put into a situation where our Fury of the North does end up getting not devalued, but kind of relegated to a future play, which I'm actually perfectly fine with. I have no problems with that whatsoever. And then I think we'll just kind of take like a big triple swing. So we'll do this. Now that he's done that, I'm not unhappy with that at all. I'll kill the Ezreal. That's perfectly easy here. It's a very different spot from last turn because he's actually like much closer to flipping the Ezreal. And we don't need to like be banking the mana for the Fury. Because he pre-committed, right? Because he pressed his buttons before we even thought about attacking, which he had to do because Kato represents a threat that triggers at uncounterable speed on the attack declaration. So he has to do that there, which is pretty impactful, right? So what that means is I don't have to threaten Fury. I can develop into this, which is perfectly fine. This is actually kind of exactly what we want, right? Like, we're not in a hurry to use the Fury. Fury is going to be really big for future potential. We did want to find a way to use Culling Strike, and we did. So it sort of looks like our plan didn't work out there, but this is like part of why the play makes sense. It's like we don't need to Culling Strike last turn. Keeping the Fury option open is free, and we were able to get the Culling Strike value that we would have got anyway, right? And this is like why developing into them is so good. Because if we take open attacks there, then we just start losing to a lot of hands we don't really need to be. So we actually are pretty close to leveling our Ashe, which is a pretty nice threat. We don't want him to use a removal on our defensive turn, because our way of keeping things alive is furry, but we really want to be using this on offense, so that we can get it the 2-for-1, right? Super important. So what that means here is we just want to be able to like commit a high amount of mana in a way that like doesn't really give him as much counterplay. I think I'm kind of fine with like using Kato for that. I'm not really too worried about anything he can do here. If he plays like Ezreal, second Ezreal, then that's a bit of a punish potentially. but the only thing we could have done about that is passed and then threaten the Sejuani if he plays the second Ezreal. He'll pass back and burn our mana, so that's kind of no good either. Okay, and he uses the Thermo here. Like I said, this is like ideally somewhat nice to avoid because we don't want to give him value on removals that don't have to hit value, but because it's Thermo, Fury is usually not going to be hitting value on it anyway. Fury wants to be hitting fast speed removal, keeping something alive that does a lot of damage against fast speed removal, basically. That's kind of the objective of this card. So we have the total 12 mana, which we don't really have a great way of tallying up. Ashe with Brittle Steel will level the Ashe, which is a pretty big thing. So I think Ashe Brittle Fury is just the easy play. Now the question is, so we're pre-committed into developing. We have a 10 mana play on a 12 mana hand. What does this mean for us? Well, because we're already pre-committing it, the development, I think there's no downside to not Omen Hawk first, basically. None whatsoever. What's the upside? It's pretty minimal, but there's some hands that, like... Okay, let's say he's on, like, a Get Excited Static Shock hand, which, by the way, is not that uncommon here. Then we're sort of making his play... He kind of has to do that now, because he wants to kill the Kato before it can give this buff, and we're lowering his option on our Ashe. That's, like... It's niche. It's mostly about, like, habit building. In this case, Omen first doesn't really matter, but in general, when you are planning out your turn and you're thinking, okay, well, I have to play this first anyway, you really, you know, you want to be playing the thing that gives them less reactive response options, right? Wow, he's got the third concussive palm. That's pretty funny. Definitely will make things slightly more awkward here. I'm okay with that, though. We've got our, like, good fast speed options. So here, we just kind of have to do the full attack. It's going to be a really easy Brittle Steel. We want to just, like, Frostbite, make sure that the Ashe is flipping. So we're going to Brittle Steel the Lifesteal one, of course, and making sure it can't block. What's the difference between Ashe Sejuani here? Honestly, Sejuani can be a little bit better. The big difference is just that, like, Ashe flips sooner, getting the crystal arrow sooner. She doesn't feel like she's specifically removable. Like, if the dude is on another will, you know, if he wills Sejuani, I lose 2 more mana. So Sejuani is kind of bigger, and honestly, she could have been correct there. It could have easily been a misplay. But I favor the, like, if I level Ashe later than this, the arrow's gonna do nothing. Like, this game is ending really, really, really soon. Like, super, super soon here. Okay, so nothing's really going on here. He's not threatening anything, so I'm not going to press any buttons. Again, you want to look at card games as, like, it's a resource. It's about leveraging resources equivalently so they don't throttle each other, right? Your main 2 resources are cards and mana. You can't play mana without cards, and you can't use mana without, or we can't use mana without cards, and you can't play cards without mana. So it just comes down to, like, you know, the balance of mana and cards, right? What this means is, like, when you look at a hand like this, we don't have a lot of ways to use mana. Therefore, the idea of being mana efficient is less useful. If we had a bigger hand, we might take a Fury there in a position like that. The reason being, very simply, that we need to use our mana eventually. Here, not so much. So he should take the open attack on the Ezreal. I mean, he knows that we have the Crystal Arrow in hand, so it's going to be his only opportunity to use the Ezreal. And here we've got a couple of fairly interesting plays, right? I mean, we can take a Crystal Arrow that's trying to be as defensive as possible. We really want to see, like, how many of these decks are running Deny. I'll go ahead and just pull up the list again. This is, like, the common version. You know, let's you know what? Because I'm in Masters, I'll use Masters rank. Let's look at the most common Ezreal version of Masters, and let's just literally look at how many Denies they're commonly running. Why not? 2 Denies is the most standard version, and his hand is pretty narrow at the point where it's, like, pretty easy to put him on, like, a Deny. These 3 cards have been swamped in his hand for a while. There's not that many cards they could be at this point. Sejuani is not going to be leveling up or anything like that. He did discard 1 Deny. Yeah, that's a good point. I forgot about that. I saw it and then I forgot. Yes, he did discard 1 Deny. It's kind of a weird one. I mean, the idea of, like, committally developing into the Ezreal, saving the Ashe here with Fury, there's a lot of, like, weird plays to make out. And the Deny is going to be unbreakable. At this point, you're just pretty much hoping he doesn't have it. The thing is, basically, that if we assume he has Deny, then it does lower the odds of... It does lower the arrow value, basically, right? Or, sorry, the value of keeping Ashe alive. Because keeping Ashe alive is kind of only good for arrow. So now, he takes a burst pass. He's almost certainly not done with his turn. The question is, what do we do here? Well, I think at this point there's not really a downside in using Sejuani. Her battle cry effect isn't really going to get use later, and we do need to spend the mana at this point. Because it's very possible we are about to draw 2 cards, one off the arrow and one off the top, which means we do need to be like a little bit mana efficient. He's got the Karma, so he's got the flipped Karma and flipped Ezreal. Might have just lost at this point. And here's where, like, if he was under 4, maybe I'd use my arrow under deny. Like, hit a small chance that we have that option. Reasonably speaking, at this point, we basically just have to hope he's on a somewhat dud hand. Okay, Static Shock is fairly interesting here for a couple of reasons. He's on a draw 2. He's dealing a lot of damage to Ashe. At the end of the day, like, if Ashe dies, can we win? I think we can. I think our best bet is to take an open swing representing the full overwhelm kill condition, actually, at this point. I think one of our win conditions is assuming that his last face down card is the other deny that he just kept up there. He rummaged after he rummaged. There's one card that he saved from the rummage, and I'm making the bet that it's deny, which would have made sense for him to do because he knew we were on Crystal Arrow. Otherwise, we can't make that call. But we do have the double overwhelm, and we can threaten an attack here. That, I mean, again, we're really behind, but this is probably our best bet. Like, we have to take the draw and the mana efficiency while we have it. So. But, yeah, I mean, when you're against, like, this board, you usually just kind of lose. So again, a very interesting position where we have to like juggle the merits of open attacking versus not. I mean, developing here does a lot of things. You know, obviously we're threatening more damage, especially like Icefell Archer into Dragon Link threatens a bit more damage. Reasonably speaking, we are just dead here. So what are the benefits of open attacking? What hand states can we brick by open attacking? Well, sometimes hands of stuff like Static Shock actually lose out on a lot of reach, right? Lose out on a ton of reach. The reason for this being is because the Static Shock does need to be able to have an extra action to draw the extra cards behind it. But he's already used 2 Static Shocks, so it's a little bit hard to put him on a third one. Like, we don't have a ton here, really. It's like the odds of winning without developing this are just kind of even lower. So I guess we develop this, but it should easily. I mean, it's a low percentage chance it makes a difference, right? Because usually we're dead either way. Yeah, that's enough for me. So, pretty unfortunate, but I'm still fairly happy with how the game played out overall. Let's go ahead and look back and think what we can do differently in this game, and specifically, like, which cards are hitting our deck. Like, did the deck succeed at this game? Was this sort of like, you know, like what ended up really happening in that game, right? Because of course sometimes a loss is just a loss, right? It's like the Freud thing. Like sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, and sometimes it's a raging cock. Hitting all 3 concussive palms and 2 wills is a big oof. Yeah, and that's mostly what happened in that game. I think we actually had like a really favored scenario, but the fact that he had 5 out of those 6 spells is pretty nuts. That's really how he wants to be countering our deck, because we do have a lot of like big beefy units and the Fury, so we can beat most removal options. We can beat like Mystic Shots and stuff, but when they're on like the triple concussive palm 2 will hand, it does feel bad. Now, here's the thing. We can't stop there. We need to ask ourselves now, not only is it, oh, did we lose because of that, but did we just lose because of that? That's a very, very, very important word that changes the entire question. Did we just lose because of that? Or could we have engineered a better scenario to get more ahead besides that, right? For example, maybe saving a second Culling Strike. We were on the double Culling Strike hand. We can avoid using one on the Shadow Assassin and try to target both Ezreals with that. That's really difficult to do in that position. I don't think we can do that. We need to be playing like more aggressively and trying to close out. And we kind of like have a bricked hand if we don't take it. It is a matchup where something like Tavern Keeper does fail us pretty hard. The Reckless Trifarian felt pretty solid there. Assessor was hitting positions. It's mostly we just didn't really have the kind of like aggression that we needed to be able to beat that hand, right? So can we beat that hand? Not really. I in the matchup, if they're gonna draw like 5 of their kind of like hard stall cards, I think we can just concede at that point. This is very much the kind of deck that should be losing to that one. It's like mid-range centric, and it's not really super worth boosting the win percentage. So when you're thinking about deck building, boosting a win percentage by making modifications to your deck is going to come in the 2 different forms, right? 2 different factors that you're looking for. One, your loss rate against that deck, because you gain more from boosting win rate against a higher loss rate deck. Because when you boost win rate, your win rate gets boosted as a function of your loss rate, right? When you have a 20% win rate in the deck, you make the deck better, and you're improving the 80% of scenarios where you're losing, right? That's why we don't want to abandon weak matchups, and we want to fight for them, and we don't want to overcommit for strong matchups, right? So what that means is, and then the second factor is like how common the deck actually is. It's a bit of an unfavored matchup, and I think it's not common enough of a deck for me to really mind. I'm pretty happy keeping it exactly as it is. The one thing is, against like these controlling matchups, we could see cutting down from 2 Cavern Keepers. But for the most part, we can conclude that that was mostly just kind of like a bit of an outlier that doesn't represent too much here. But it's very important to be thorough about that process, because like that's like a 4-step process. You can't do that so fast, because like sometimes your opponent is on a nut draw, but that doesn't mean that your deck is doing what it should be, right? Sometimes your opponent's on a crazy draw, but your deck still should have been able to beat that draw given some change that would have made sense, right? And I see that so commonly that people will have that mentality of like ruling out a case just because of the opponent's position, which is not enough. It's not enough. It's not about winning or losing, it's about how you're winning and how you're losing. If you're losing because you hit a bad, uncommon matchup and the opponent drew 5 of their 6 counter cards to you, then that's fine. It's not really like, it's not a bad sign for the deck or like the position in the meta.